On this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, what do we need to make of the CJ Henderson signing on Thursday afternoon, and where do the Texans go now in the draft?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, y'all know him for writing, y'all know him for talking, Sports Illustrator's own Texas credential media member, I'm some sports guy. Texas credential media member Cody Davis.
But we all some sports guys at the end of the day. That's why your name will forever be iconic.
Iconic. Listen, you know what? Well, that name came from just being in a barbershop, right? You got your barber guy, you got your other guy, right? You got all different type of guys, but you know, I'm that sports guy. We talking sports when I come in. What's going on?
I miss the barbershop.
So shout out to my barber.
I can't lie. I miss it.
I love it. I love it. We do a very good job of having some very structured barbershop talk here on the show. But if this is your first time watching or listening to the Locked On Texans podcast, please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you for stopping by. Come on back. And to all of our returning listeners, thank you for coming back as we continue to talk Texans. You guys lend us your ear each and every time. We'll be diving into the YouTube comments today. I can't wait to address one comment. We will be looking at where do the Texans now go in the draft? What should be their target in terms of position? I think we open up today's show looking at what to make of the CJ Henderson signing. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on. Cody, CJ Henderson, and the Houston Texans agreed to a deal Thursday afternoon. I kind of was shocked at that deal, to be quite honest with you. They brought in another former number one overall cornerback. Not number one, but they brought in another former first round cornerback in Jeff Okudah, who I thought had some good moments last year for the Atlanta Falcons. But they, signed CJ Henderson Thursday afternoon, and I'm kind of surprised at this. I want you to take it over, but CJ Henderson, I don't think has ever had really a good moment, honestly. But I would like to say that I see this team maybe trying to transition into more of a man coverage team in terms of their cornerbacks. Now that they have their defensive front set up how they got it, we know that they've improved in that area. So I expect for this team to run a lot of man or cover three, which basically turns into man a lot of times. But what are your thoughts on CJ Henderson?
I'm not gonna say I don't like it because, John, to your point, and one, he's one of the guys that I'm gonna make sure, probably starting in training camp, because first and foremost, I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and automatically have a 53-man roster spot, i.e. like Jeff Okudah. He's definitely going to be on a guy like when we start breaking down, the guys that's going to be on the bubble for the 53-man roster at the start of training camp. And of course, when we get closer to cut down day, I'm already expecting CJ Henderson name to be a part of that conversation. But he is one of the guys that I am interested in, trying to get to know, talking to him both on and off the record, because look, you're looking at a guy who was a first round pick in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, with the Jacksonville Jaguars. After 2 seasons, he goes to the Carolina Panthers, which was his last team, and spent the 2021 season with him. So, I'm just interested to know what has transpired. I know a lot of people are looking at CJ. I know some people are saying, this signing don't mean anything. John, to your point, talking about him not really having a real opportunity. We all know the Jacksonville Jaguars were not in playoff championship contention early on. At that time, they was basically in the same situation as the Houston Texans. And then he goes to Carolina. And then, of course, Carolina, they've been going through their up and down over the last couple of seasons. So, I'm wondering if it's just one of those moments where he needs to be in a situation where, look, he's not going to be CB number 1. He needs to be
or
in a
two,
really
or three.
or 2 or 3. Hopefully, if everything goes right with him, he's able to revamp his career. Maybe he can take the helm at CB number 3. But getting him with a really good defensive back coach like Dino Vasso, getting him with a good head coach like Coach DeMeco Ryans, maybe the Houston Texans can finally, get something out of CJ where he could revive his career right here in the city of Houston. But I'm also looking at it from this standpoint. I'm wondering, does this signing mean the end of the Texans going after one of the top corners in the draft? And I only say that because, look, going back to the NFL Combine, Nick Caserio said that he wanted to pair Darius Stingley Jr. with another corner starting opposite of him. As of right now, I think that's Jeff Okudah. With the signing of CJ Henderson, I believe the Houston Texans right now have, I think, a total of maybe 4 cornerbacks on their roster. I don't see them wasting one of their top draft picks, one of their 2 draft picks at the time this recorded on March 22nd, 2024. But I don't see them wasting one of their top draft picks in the second round on one of the top cornerbacks coming out in this year's draft, because then it's going to be in a situation where you're going to just have too many guys. Maybe I'm looking too much into it in terms of the numbers and, position battles and all that other stuff. But I just don't see it, John. Also, we finished the show yesterday's show talking about Xavier Howard. I wonder if this also means that the Houston Texans are not going after Howard.
Yeah,
given the fact that he said, I have a Texan tattoo and a Rockets tattoo. Somebody, of course, from the city of Houston who loves his hometown.
Yeah, and if the Rockets make the play in, I may also go give me a Rockets tattoo. But I think for the CJ Henderson signing, for me, Cody, I think you hit on a lot of things. I do disagree with you on one. First, I do believe that the Houston Texans, out of 42, 59, or 86, would and still should draft a corner. Okay. I think CJ Henderson is kind of like Shaq Griffin from last year. Honestly, I think Jeff Okudah is in the same boat, to be completely honest with you.
Really? Because he had a good year in Atlanta.
I think for Jeff, he is more on the, I definitely see him making the roster, right? But, for CJ, the only reason why I believe Shaq Shaq made the team was because he that last preseason game, he made some plays for this team. Yeah. And if you remember, what played in his favor a little bit more was Houston moving on from Desmond King, which at that time we were all kind of taken aback from it, by that decision. So for CJ Henderson, man, I'm not sure what they are seeing in him personally. Again, former Jacksonville Jaguar, so we had plenty of time to see him in this division, right? And also Houston had an opportunity to see him last year when he played for the Panthers. He has, according to PFF, since entering the league, he has given up over 12 yards per catch since 2020, right? He has given up a total of 13 touchdowns compared to only 3 interceptions. He's allowed a passer rating of 113.9. He's allowed a completion percentage of 70.5. He struggled since entering the league. So, what Houston desperately needs, though, was to replace guys for special teams and get depth. No doubt about it. And this was a cheap way of doing it, honestly. I thought that, maybe, you re-sign Steven Nelson. We talk about, does this mean the end of Xavier Howard? I don't see Houston and Steven Nelson coming to terms of bringing him back, which honestly would be a mistake in my eyes. So I absolutely see Houston still addressing the cornerback position in the draft. Because for one, addressing it in the draft and signing both CJ Henderson and Jeff Okudah are just insurance plans for one another, if that makes sense. Like Jeff Okudah, and I'll include CJ, but mainly Jeff, his insurance plan for addressing it in the draft is, if he turns out and pans out to be very good at what he do, right, and continue on how he ended off last season, then we may have a star here in Houston and Jeff Okudah who finally put it all together. The assurance plan for drafting winning the draft is, well, at least we have an opportunity to draft a cornerback that we have scouted through and through. The Houston Texans haven't done that since Derek Stingley.
It's
So
true.
they didn't scout Okuda in the sense of wanting to go get him immediately. They didn't scout CJ Henderson and draft him. Well, they may have looked at him in this tape when they came out, right? You scout all of the top guys, and they were drafted in the first round. But scout and draft, scout and grab. They didn't do that with those guys. So they have opportunity to do this for the first time since Derek Stingley, and that insurance plan could be, well, hey, if you two guys don't pan out, at least we got our guy. But I do love the fact that both CJ Henderson and Jeff Okuda and whoever they draft will be given right over to Dino Vassell. And that's why I can't agree with you more. You guys know how much I love Dino on this show. I think he's a phenomenal cornerback positional coach. And I think if we're going to see a resurgence of any of these guys and an emergence of a rookie, we are going to have to credit Dino a lot for the great job he does. So I am positive about that. I do look at that situation and I'm thinking to myself, this may be the most talent Dino has had in that position. And that I cannot wait to see how it pans out. This show is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in the day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Would you read a book? Would you watch an episode of the Locked On Texans podcast? If we all had that extra hour, we always wonder, okay, what can I knock out of my life? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find out what matters to you the most so you can do it more. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make what makes you happy a priority more with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. It's Friday, right? Going into the weekend. If you're in the city of Houston, the weather wasn't the best.
Oh my gosh. I went to Rice's Pro Day that also had, it was really good, man. By the way, Jelix Hutt, the guy that I talked to at the NFL Combine, he had a really good pro day. And then they had another guy. I can't remember his name, but I promise you guys, I'm going to go back, get his name. And when we really start doing our draft coverage and stuff, he came from Texas A&M Kingsville. Never heard of the school, looked him up, numbers really good. And I also saw him talking to one of the Houston Texans scouts. So that is one guy. Please forgive me. I cannot remember his name. But that pro day, man, was really, really good. I say all that just to say I literally spent the entire day going from Rice's Pro Day back to Toyota Center, driving in the rain not 24/7, but all day yesterday. It was so annoying.
It was a lot. But pro days, combines, this is the season where we really get excited to talk about, whether it's prospects coming, talk to prospects coming, or just what direction the Texans will go. The last couple of seasons, it's been pretty easy, right? It's out of Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley, you draft one of them. Last year, you definitely draft a quarterback, and we've been, beating on the table. It was CJ. Then we saw Houston trade up for Will Anderson. This year, Cody, I'm kind of confused on where they're going to go, right? If they would have stayed at the number 23 overall pick and maybe, with the recent signings of Jeff Okuda and CJ Henderson, I would have still been beating on the table that they needed to draft the top corner available. But now, with the trade of the Minnesota Vikings, the number 42 overall pick, 59, 86, I think those are three critical draft picks. I don't know what should be first. I can only say what position that they still should draft in those 3 slots? Cody, what are your thoughts on where should the Houston Texans go?
For the whole entire draft, forget 42, 59, 86, or whatever. I'm starting to think, man, this has to be an offensive draft because CJ Henderson makes the what 13, 14 free agency signing for the Houston Texans, and out of those acquisitions, only like 2 came on the offensive side of the ball. And I get it, I understand it. This is one of those things where it's like, okay, your head coach is a defensive minded guy, and like I've been telling you guys here ever since maybe the bye week, when it seemed like the Houston Texans were definitely going to try to revamp their roster mid-season to try to get them to the playoffs. What is something I've been talking about? Coach DeMeco Ryans wants to add to the defense, and Coach DeMeco Ryans love improving his front 4, his front 7. So on one hand, I'm not surprised that so many of the acquisitions that we saw the Houston Texans do came on the defensive line, came within the secondary, but more so corner. But John, I just go back to even leading up to free agency. The only name or the only position that you and I, just kept hearing was how they're going to improve their running back room. Saquon Barkley was at the top of the list. You miss out on Saquon. You make a trade for Joe Mixon. Okay, so in one way is you check that box. You improve your offensive backfield, but at the same time, you didn't do nothing with the tight end core. You damn sure didn't do nothing with the wide receiving core. So it's like, okay, well, maybe you can go and get one of the top tier, the premier wide receivers in this year's draft at pick number 23. You trade your 23 overall pick. Now you're at 42. So it's like, what is the direction of this team right now going into the draft? Because John, I do believe that this team has an opportunity to reach championship contention. This team has an opportunity to compete today for a chance to represent the AFC New Orleans. It's a long shot, but I still think they have an opportunity because most importantly, they have their foundation set. Quarterback, edge, corner, coach, play callers, like your foundation is set. However, my biggest priority for the Houston Texans this offseason was how can you continue to build upon that foundation? Because you could have a solid foundation and build a crappy house and you're not going to get anything out of
it. Man, Vacation Bible School once taught us the wise man built his house upon a rock.
Man,
I think when I look at where do the Texans go now, so we did a Locked On podcast, like for the entire network. We did a mock draft with the number 42 overall pick, and this is because of what they have not done as of yet at the time of this recording. We went with Xavier Worthy. And we can't sit here and Nick Casario, if you listen closely, and sometimes you don't have to listen closely, he tells you what he wants. And both Nick and DeMeco said we want guys that can get open, basically. The last time we played football, it was it was Nico Collins, and it was the corpse of Robert Woods. It was nobody could get open. Nobody could impact the offense, which left CJ struggling out there. I think Xavier Worthy is that guy. I would have loved if A.D. Mitchell would have never, went crazy in doing his pro day and combine. Maybe he would have failed there, but I think he's definitely a first rounder now at this point. But I think Xavier Worthy will be there, and I think Houston should, draft him. Regardless of who is the player, I think it should now target the target list for the Houston Texans should now be receiver and safety. Honestly, we have yet to see them address the safety position, and I may be the only person in Houston, Cody, you as well, that is looking at that situation in confusion. But when I look at 42, 59, 86, receiver, safety, you can swap them out, right? Because I think if you want to go with the best safety available, maybe Kitchens will be available, but you can go safety, receiver. Roman Wilson may be available at 59. He should be. And with the 86th overall pick, corner. and then I think they have what was it, like 104 or something like that, 122. You can go draft another receiver, but
Mm.
I definitely think that the positions that still need help, wide receiver, corner, and safety, those are the positions where I think Houston should really look to draft first. Man,
Hmm.
it's time for Coach Cal to go, right? BYU with the bid against the Dukies. Kentucky can't beat nobody. You know, in the past, you wasn't making no money. Now you can say goodbye to those busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset, and if you did yesterday on Thursday, you made a lot of money. Or if you're betting on the number one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sports book. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in your pocket to use on point spreads, money lines, and much more. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the net. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, we are going to dive into the YouTube comments. I can't wait to address this one. My man H-Town Player Made Type Fade. I do like that name. This was on the What Can the Houston Texans Expect from the Offseason Acquisition of Hunter and Mixon podcast. He said Mixon can get 3rd and 1, Motor can't. Okay, well, if we go back to last season, Devin Singletary in 3rd and 1 to 3 yards to go situations, 7 attempts, 36 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, 4 first downs, and also 2nd and 3rd and 1 yard situations, 13 first downs. Okay, Joe Mixon, 3rd and 1 to 3 yards to go situations, 15 attempts, 29 yards, 1 yard per carry, 9 first downs. So I think Devin Singletary, given the opportunities he had, 5.1 yards per carry, did a good job of getting those first downs.
Well, how much of that you think factors into Singletary running behind a better offensive line? Which brings
A lot.
us back to the point that you made on yesterday's show. As good as Joe Mixon is, can the Houston Texans get an even better version out of him, knowing that he's going to be running behind a better offensive line? An offensive line that I think, if everybody stays healthy, is going to be extremely good in 2024.
I do think that. I really do. But, you know, again, my point for last year was also due to the stubbornness of the coaching staff. Devin Singletary would have had his first 1,000 yard season. Devin Singletary could have possibly competed to be a Pro Bowl running back, right? I mean, that also could have been in play too. So I do think Mixon is going to play well for Houston, guys. No doubt about it. But in terms of impact, you know, this won't be a team that lives and die on their star running back because they have CJ. And with that, I can only think to myself, well, look how well they played offensively when Devin Singletary was officially the starter. They were able to put points on the board. They was able to move the ball, and they were a better running team. Joe Mixon can come in and do the same thing, and that's why I don't think it's going to be too much of a big difference. Profit _ D63, Anderson and Hunter law firm, we sacked the competition. Be great name. Because you see, what I don't like about the Texan stars, and this goes for, I think, basketball, MLB, like Astros, Rockets, Texans, they don't get a lot of national commercials. They don't get a lot of big-time commercials. You guys can say whatever you want about Deshaun Watson, but when he was in Houston, he was a star. And I think his biggest commercial was HEB. And
his biggest commercial was, I want to say the next gen commercial because I remember they had used that play when he had got kicked in the eye with against the Raiders. That was his big commercial.
But was
And
he?
got kicked in the eye.
Was he like the star of the commercial?
Yeah, it was his commercial, and I remember he was breaking it down and stuff, and it was giving the percentages of him getting kicked in the eye, throwing the touchdown. I remember that commercial. It was like it was pretty big.
Let me say this: like a brand like Next Gen is a that's a good brand, but that's like a football thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like outside of that,
he was also in the Beat commercial too. It was him. I think Patrick Mahomes, the Beats, Dre's Beats. I want to say 2020. See, he was trending in that direction before.
Before everything happened. But I say that to say this: I think that would be a cool name for Anderson and Hunter. Mm-hmm. And I think somebody's agent needs to make the call to have like a commercial made that airs week 7 once they have like 15 sacks between the two with a nice "we sacked the competition" background and voice. That'd be nice. I like that name. On the Nick Caserio injury update, shines light on Houston's third-year guard, Kenan Green. It's a lot of positive on here. But I think the consensus right now is just Kenan Green needs to get bigger. One comment, Kenan needs to get in their weight room and build his strength. And also in that same episode, we talked about John Mechie. Don't sleep on John Mechie. So I think a lot of fans right now haven't necessarily just given up on the 2022 draft class, players that has had some some misfortune happen to them that has held them back from reaching their full potential as the Houston Texans players. So that includes Kenan Green. And I don't think we're asleep on John Mechie. Cody, do you think we're asleep on John Mechie? Do you think we just want more added to his wide receiver room? Me personally, I just want Robert Woods
going out. I wouldn't necessarily say that we'll sleep on John Mechie because John Wood is something that I started preaching this time last year. Regardless of what was your expectations for John Mechie, and we all thought highly of Mechie when the Houston Texans drafted him in 2022. But what was my number one thing I kept preaching? The 2023 season is going to be basically a red shirt year for him because it's going to be a year for him to finally get back in football shape. And I also said way back then, you could go back and pull up the tape in the film. This is going to be 2024 is going to be the very first off season where he's really going to have an opportunity to just focus on football. And I know I mentioned this a couple of days ago, but I mentioned it again today. Locker clean out day. I stood in front of his lockers just chopping it up with John Mechie. And he told me that he was so excited going into the offseason because for the first time in almost 2 years, his sole focus is on football. And that's why I've always said if you want to start evaluating John Mechie as a player, you're going to have to give it until 2024. And it's only fair because given what that young man had to go to, I mean, he had double whammies against him. I just knew you couldn't really expect much from John Mechie, and that's why I said maybe the Houston Texans are starting to see something behind closed doors in John for them to say, you know what, that's our wide receiver number 3.
Yeah. Also in that same podcast, YBM Simba 2410. We don't desperately need to add to the wide receiver room. We have 2 1K receivers. Noah Brown is a solid 3 or 4 option, and tight end is set with Dalton. Draft the receiver to be wide receiver 3 and be done with this silly ass topic already. This is utterly ridiculous at this point. This is the same lame conversation we were having this time last year. If Noah Brown is your number 3, then you have a good wide receiving core. And he likely won't be the number 3 after the draft. The wide receiver room wasn't what held this team back last year as an offense. In fact, we were a top 10 in most passing categories. It was a failure of the running game. Add a legit running game to this last year's offense, and it's damn near unstoppable. CJ has plenty of weapons, and he'll get more in the draft. Don't waste money in draft capital. Wide receiver. I had to comment and say that is some mediocrity in that man's veins. We all watched the Baltimore Raven game, right?
I was there in Baltimore.
I came away from that game saying to myself, that was the game Tank Dell was needed. Because nobody else could get open. And throughout that post, he mentioned Noah Brown. I'm not necessarily mad at Noah Brown coming back, honestly. But at no point did he mention the fact that Robert Woods had negative 2 yards in that game. At no point did he mention the fact that all season Robert Woods was not able to do what was the one thing Nick and D'Amico was looking for right now?
Wide receiver that can get open.
At no point was that mentioned. At no point did he mention that as much as fans like Hutchinson, the best thing we've seen from Hutch last year was those reverses. He wasn't able to really get open. And in his limited opportunities, let me add that. I don't understand why people look at modern football and say to that, we're going to go outside and look at what Joe Burrow, what made him successful, what made Patrick Mahomes successful, what has made Josh Allen have a turn in his career compared to his first 2 seasons in the NFL. Wide receivers matter. And right now, Houston has one 1,000-yard receiver on their roster. Tank would have got it. I get it. But Nico and Tank, outside of that, we are still banking on Mechie, but based off what we saw last season, who else in this wide receiver room, do you think can get open and make plays consistently for this team? Also, considering both Nico and now Tank, I don't think it's going to be a storyline in his career, have suffered injuries. Who else can you trust? It ain't nobody, man. It's nobody. So thinking that the team doesn't need to add to this wide receiver room, it's mediocrity. That's a mediocre way of thinking. It's all through your veins, buddy. Sorry. Thank y'all for watching and listening to today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Follow Locked On Texans at Locked On Texans.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS _24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.